Gungage is an often overlooked game on the PlayStation 1. Developed by Konami and released in 1999, Gungage is a game that's hard to describe because it's atypical compared to other games at the time. In Gungage, you play as one of 4 characters, or okay, you play as Wackle Skate because everyone else is still locked when you start the game. Wackle Skate is an incredible name though, we need more goofy names like these in video games. As soon as you start Gungage, you can tell this is something very different from your average shooter. It's one of those games where it will be hard to describe the controls accurately, and maybe even in the gameplay footage it won't look all that fun because I'm stumbling over a lot of stuff, but I can assure you that it takes just a little time to get used to it and it's a lot of fun. Maybe the best way to describe it is if God Hand was a third-person shooter. A playable third-person shooter. The first stage even looks kinda similar. Playing the game, you look around with the D-pad and strafe with the shoulder buttons. It feels a bit like aiming around in something like Star Fox or Panzer Dragoon, but aiming is also how you turn around when you move the aiming reticle far enough to the side of the screen. Double tapping the shoulder buttons gives you a quick dodge, and you can turn around faster while dodging. Aiming is not as big of an obstacle as it sounds, since the game has a pretty good auto-targeting system. Once something is in range, the game will automatically lock onto the target for you. I thought I'd have issues with that going in, but no, this is pretty good actually. You can tell the game was designed around how it plays, because at some point it throws invisible jellyfish enemies at you and they're not a major threat. You might lose track of them out of carelessness, but the auto-targeting system will always aim at them when they're in range, so you know where they are through that. That doesn't mean that the controls are natural or even all that smooth, it's always going to be a clunky game. It is so clunky that a lot of people have twisted their fond childhood memories to make themselves believe that Gungage has dual analog support. Tons of online resources say the game has DualShock controller support, but no, this is a full original controller game, there is no analog here. The biggest hurdle with controls is jumping, but thankfully jumping is mostly used to dodge incoming projectiles. There are stages where you can get bonus items by platforming at important moments, and there are minor obstacles that need to be jumped over. Gungage realizes that jumping isn't its strong point because, oh boy, the few times that I tried to go for the bonus things were not a good experience. The main focus of the game stays on being a shooter, and Wackle gets a pretty satisfying burst-firing sci-fi handgun and 2 defensive skills that cost energy. Energy gets replenished by picking up crystals. One of his 2 skills fires a special bullet that freezes enemies in their tracks if you shoot them with it. The other gives you a shield that helps tank incoming shots. Where Gungage shines though is the stage designs. Every stage feels pretty much like its own thing, when a game designed like this could have very easily led to it becoming a corridor shooter. There's strong visual and gameplay variety between the stages, so you're never left with the feeling that you're going for the same kind of objective between them. It's really neat, I like it. The different characters shake things up pretty heavily too. I figured that they'd just give them different guns and 2 different sub-weapons, but Konami really went all out with this. I'll start with the second unlockable character because that's the one that's easiest to unlock, so if you give Gungage a shot and you aren't too sure about the controls early on, maybe you want to give Steer Harkabus a chance instead. You unlock Steer by interacting with the wanted poster hidden during the first stage. Once you've interacted with it, Steer will be on the character select screen of the main menu from that point onwards. She has a much more fluid movement and can fire a minigun without slowing down, melting down enemies a lot faster. Steer also gets a nicer, faster dodge that doesn't take away from her momentum as much. She also has a radar on the screen at all times telling you where enemies are, so you're a lot less likely to get blindsided. And she also has 3 special attacks. A laser that locks onto a bunch of enemies and hits them all at once, kind of like how lock-on in Star Fox or Panzer Dragoon works. A shield that does high damage to enemies very close to you. And Nova, a big nuke that kills bosses dead before the fights even begin. In a lot of ways, getting Steer feels a lot like unlocking Maria in Rondo of Blood. It makes it much easier to learn the basics of the game as her, and you can get her at the start of the game. Then there's Card Birdish, who is a lot slower and has a horrible dodge move, but he gets multiple different normal guns that don't have an ammo cost to them, alongside one big special move that works a bit more like a nuke in a shmup. I didn't really like playing as Card all that much though. In fact, I didn't beat the game playing as him. stopping somewhere at the halfway point or so, even though I did beat the game as the other 3 characters. And finally, there's D. Von Fang. D feels like something in between Wackel and Steer, with Wackel's general gameplay but Steer's sub-weapons and radar. Just like Steer, one of his sub-weapons just completely erases bosses from existing. Also, I think his damage output is higher than either of the previous characters, unless you count Card's grenade launcher. He's pretty fun to play as. Playing as all the characters as you unlock them, you'll likely find him last, so his playthrough almost feels like you're bookending your time with the game, because his gameplay style resembles the first characters. One surprising element in Gungage is that the stage order and a lot of the stage design changes between the characters. Everyone goes through the stages in their own order, and most characters end up seeing different parts of those stages, or go into them under different circumstances. So you don't just replay the same content with a different moveset. You actually get some different content across the different playthroughs. Pretty ambitious for an obscure third-person shooter on the PlayStation 1. And if you're enjoying the music that you're hearing in the background and have been wondering why it sounds so familiar, Gungage's music was done by none other than Michiru Yamane, 2 years after her work on Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and you can really hear it in some of the stages. This soundtrack is definitely Castlevania worthy. So, do I recommend Gungage? Yeah, it's a pretty good game. Maybe not for everyone. The controls definitely take some time getting used to. Not everyone might be willing to go through that initial awkwardness. But once you get through that, you get a pretty enjoyable third-person shooter. And it only takes about an hour or less to go through per character as well, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. No idea why Konami never brought this over to the US while still putting it out in Europe. But yeah, Americans usually got 20 games or so for every single game that Europe did. So I'll take every game we can get, to be honest. Speaking of taking everything we can get, I asked people on Patreon a very important question. When playing third-person action games, what do you prefer? Having the game automatically aim for you so you can focus on the action? Or having to aim manually for yourself? This one was actually pretty contentious. It got very close. People opted for manual aim, and yeah, I think I'm pretty much the same in that as well. Like, it goes game to game, obviously. Not every game you would want to aim for yourself or you want automatic lock-on. Like, Gungage would not work with manual aiming. Maybe these days with dual analog controls, but not when it was released for sure. But I think I'm so far into the corner of wanting to aim for myself that I even like games like Dead Rising, where the game will just stop you completely to aim, and if you don't aim, you're probably gonna miss all your shots. How did this segue actually work? There's been nothing that's been taken. Anyway, as always, this video has been brought to you by the people who are supporting the channel on Patreon. If you would like to become one of the names that you see scrolling on the screen right now, head over to patreon.com/AboveUp and I will see ya.